Oldham's one of the 10 Greater Manchester authorities, so what we do is we're working at different spatial levels, so there's quite a lot that happens at Greater Manchester, then Oldham itself, and then obviously in the clusters with the new primary care networks at the heart of that. So, but then actually place can be street level as well, so it's interesting in terms of moving with the different geographies. So the Greater Manchester infrastructure through the Health and Social Care Partnership, but part of the broader devolution arrangements. Our integrated care system, we're building that through integrating the way that we work so that we've got much more of a place-based management team with a shared agenda, obviously aiming to deliver key outcomes together. And so there's been structural changes, but also in terms of our focus and our work, all grounded in what we describe the Oldham model. So collectively we're working for thriving communities, inclusive economy, supported by cooperative services, and they're the outcomes that we look at for everything that we do. Oldham, like many places, has significant diversity. So we've got Saddleworth and the villages up in there. We've got 23% of the boroughs in the Peak District National Park. And then we have the more urban communities. A lot of them grew up around the mills. So there used to be more millionaires in Oldham than anywhere else in the country. And our population is about 32% black and minority ethnic community. So we've got great diversity across the borough. And so community means lots of different things. It might be community of interest, it might be community of geography, and so we've been building up through our Thriving Communities work a much richer picture and understanding of our communities. So we've developed the Thriving Communities Index, which takes all sorts of measures that you would expect, you know, in terms of health outcomes and income, educational attainment, supported by something we call Nebula, which is trying to understand the assets in a community. And by assets we mean both the strengths of communities, positive activity groups, infrastructure in that way, the green infrastructure, you know, what kind of parks are there, how do people feel in terms of you know, the safety of their communities, but also kind of physical assets like parks and community buildings, so that we connect the community understanding to the more professional understanding, so that we start everything with that deep understanding. So we're working with the grain of lived experience, but also an understanding of the place. We're doing an awful lot of work in Oldham about building that sense of team, that we are Team Oldham, and that we're looking collectively at the resources that we've got, so that we're not just looking at economies of scale. It's quite often a traditional response, isn't it? You put things together and get efficiencies through economies of scale. We're looking at economies of outcome. So how do we brigade and use all the collective resources we've got around shared outcomes and ambitions for the place? I think there's also something about the role of being a translator. So being able to understand in different contexts. You know, I know much more now about the reality of how the NHS operates. I wouldn't claim to be an expert than I did before I had the joint role. We've got to be very careful then talking to people who haven't had the same exposure or aren't at that same level of development. So we were laughing in Oldham about, you know, some people they can get by, maybe order a couple of drinks and a bag of chips, and others actually haven't got any of the new language. They just, you know, think if they sort of speak louder in their existing language, they'll get by. And actually that's not going to be enough. I think we all have to understand the difference that integration really brings, but bringing the best from all the different contexts. We also talk about a blended leadership model and the importance really of recognising that one isn't better than the other, that this isn't about privileging a certain form of leadership, but clinical leadership, political leadership, professional leadership and community leadership. If we can bring that together in the room, the strength of that, the ability to really design something that works in lots of contexts is just incredibly powerful. It's a real moment, I think. We meet weekly as a joint leadership team. We also then have the Alliance Board, which is, again, a much wider alliance and doesn't really recognise the kind of provider-commissioner split. It's actually saying everybody that's got a contribution, so that's housing providers as well, it's voluntary community social enterprise sector, elected members, all in the room with an independent chair, really important. And then the actual budget, so we have a commissioning partnership board between the local authority and the CCG, and some increasing amount of the money is pooled, but not all of it. So we meet collectively for the pooled budget, and then we also have the clinical commissioning committee, as sort of part two of the meeting, which actually the elected members can't vote on in the same way as they can for the pooled budget, but they're still in the room. So we're having conversations as a single team, which is really important. So it's a bit clunky, and I think we have to recognise that some of this isn't really seamless at the moment, but it's that commitment to being the team, to being the single team for this, and working in that collective way in spite of some of the legislation or the formal arrangements that are still in place, and learning each other's world. So a lot of this is about spending time with each other and recognising that the richness of different perspectives to an issue and a deeper understanding, actually. So I so far wouldn't describe it as conflicts, but I think really good questions. And what we're really keen to say is that we're not coming into the room to then all be alike, somehow find a new. We're actually coming into the room together, recognising that diversity of perspective and view, and a real commitment to design, actually, on that basis, and beginning to kind of play with the language of democratising design, to recognise that it's power, hierarchy, all these sort of things impact on design. So we've invested a lot about leadership development at a place-based, actually smaller than one of the clusters, bringing people together to do genuine problem solving together, picking issues where we can look actually at the assets that we've got and the things that we can change. Great creativity and some fantastic change in outcomes. I spent half a day in the food bank in Oldham, for example, so all as leaders we all committed to spending time in very different contexts, because you have a much deeper appreciation of what's going on and the reality of people's lived experience. So, spending a morning talking to people that were having to use the food bank, recognising that the way our policies and the way that we work, the impact that can have on people's lives in that really deep way. It's so important for us as leaders not to always be in our office and our formal buildings, but actually to be in these localities, to be in these communities, to develop our own understanding as well. I think persistence, this is new, this is building something different. Trust gets talked about a lot. Understanding where we are on that kind of trust spectrum, really. We've done quite a lot of work in Oldham on kindness as well, and I think there's just something about that, being kind to each other, because we are all finding ourselves in different spaces, having different conversations with new sets of challenges, and I think that whole approach to kindness is really important.